They spoke his name the way people speak of storms they have never seen, with a kind of practiced dread that felt safer than curiosity. Valerius Noctane, vampire king of the northern ranges, lord of a castle whose towers cut the clouds like dark needles. Travelers crossed themselves when a raven flew too low. Mothers pulled children closer at the mention of the Black Court. Even priests, who preached mercy with bright mouths, made their voices careful when they spoke of him, as if kindness itself might be offended by the idea of a vampire having it. In the little town of Larkalow, tucked between fir forests and a river that never fully froze, fear had become a folk custom. On winter nights, people bolted shutters and told one another it was for the wind. When someone went missing on a road, lost in a whiteout or swallowed by a ravine, they said, softly and with certainty, "The king takes what he wants." It was easier than admitting the mountains were indifferent, and that the world could be cruel without intention. Elowen did not believe in most of the stories. She believed in work and in the aching reality of empty cupboards. She believed in her mother's hands growing weaker and her brother's boots wearing through at the toes. She believed in the way the town council looked at her family as if poverty were a contagious illness. Still, even Elowen lowered her gaze when the northern wind came down from the high passes and rattled the window panes, because everyone did. Fear, she had learned, was a language you spoke whether you wanted to or not. She was 23 when the first kindness found her, wrapped in a mystery. It began with a sack of grain. The winter had been lean. The river ice had come early and hard, and the barges that brought supplies from the south had turned back. Larkalow's storehouse was nearly bare, and the council had tightened the rations until the poor began to measure their days by how dizzy they felt. Elowen had not eaten since the morning before when she woke, made tea from dried nettle, and told her mother she wasn't hungry. That night, she stepped out to fetch water and found, sitting beside the well like a patient animal, a sack of grain larger than anything she'd ever owned. There was no mark of the merchant's guild, no note, only a strip of black ribbon tied neatly around the twine. She looked up and down the street. Houses were shuttered. Snow fell in soft, slow flakes, making the world muffled and private. She waited, but no one came to claim it. A sensible person might have shouted, might have woken neighbors, might have called the council. But the hunger in her home was a kind of quiet emergency that did not leave much room for ceremony. Elowen dragged the sack inside, leaving a trail of snow and guilt, and listened as her mother's breath eased in sleep when she smelled the first warm porridge in days. In the morning, when neighbors noticed the steam rising from Elowen's chimney, they came with careful eyes and hungry politeness. "Where did you get it?" asked Mrs. Padron, whose children were thin as reeds. Elowen opened her mouth, then closed it again. She did not know how to speak the truth, that the grain had arrived like a secret. She only said, "It was left by the well." Mrs. Padron's eyes darted, as if the word "left" might summon an unseen figure. Old Bram, who had once been a hunter before his knees failed him, spat into the snow. "He's marking you," he muttered. "That's how it starts. Gifts, then debts." "The king," someone whispered, and the fear in the word did not sound like anger. It sounded like relief that there was an explanation, even a terrible one. Elowen's stomach twisted. She had not wanted a story to attach itself to her family, but stories clung like burrs. Over the next week, other sacks appeared, small bundles of salt and dried beans left outside doorways that belonged to the poorest in town. A bundle of blankets appeared on the steps of the widow Kess. A jar of honey appeared outside the schoolhouse where the children had been trying to learn on empty stomachs. The council sent men to watch the streets at night, but they returned with frostbitten ears and nothing to report. No footprints in the snow, no creak of wagon wheels. Only the ribbon, always black, always tied with a care that felt strangely respectful. Larkalow's fear, instead of easing, sharpened. Kindness unnerved them more than cruelty would have. Cruelty fit the stories. Kindness demanded questions. Elowen told herself not to think of it. She tried to be grateful in the simple way her mother taught her. Take what the day offers, and do not look too long into the dark corners of why. But on the 9th night, the mystery stepped closer. Her brother, Rowan, had not come home from the mill. He was 14, proud, and too eager to prove he was stronger than hunger. When Elowen went to search for him, she found the mill's door hanging open like a mouth that had forgotten to close. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and cold grain dust. The lantern that should have been lit was dark. She called Rowan's name, her voice thin in the wide space. A sound came from the back, soft, like someone trying not to be heard. Elowen gripped her shawl like a weapon and moved carefully, stepping around sacks and broken barrels. She found Rowan crouched behind a stack of boards, his cheeks wet, his arm pressed to his side. "There's someone out there," he whispered. "A man in the trees. He followed me from the road." Elowen's heart went rigid. "Did he come in?" Rowan shook his head. He just watched. She dared to peek through a crack in the wall where the boards had warped. The moon made the snow bright enough to see shadows. The forest edge stood in quiet ranks. And there, between two fir trunks, was a figure in a long coat, still as stone. Not moving closer, not retreating. Elowen stared until her eyes ached, trying to make sense of the silhouette. The town's stories rose like bile, black cloak, red eyes, teeth like knives. Yet what she saw was only a tall man standing at a distance, as if he had taken a position and intended to keep it. The figure lifted a hand, not in a beckoning gesture, but in something that felt like a warning, palm outward, firm and calm. Then he turned, soundless, and disappeared into the trees. In the morning, Elowen found something else. A length of rope tied neatly to the mill's broken latch, repaired well enough that the door would close again. And on the threshold, where the snow should have been smooth, she saw the faintest impression of bootprints, unusually narrow, as if the wearer walked lightly. When she told the council, they nodded gravely. "The king's eyes are on us," the magistrate said, as if that settled everything. But Elowen could not stop thinking of the hand raised in warning. Not invitation, not threat, warning. Warning of what? The answer came 3 days later, and it did not come with fangs. A band of men arrived from the south claiming to be trade guards, offering to escort a wagon of supplies through the pass, at a price Larkalo could not afford. Their smiles were polite, but their eyes measured doorframes and windows, the way hungry people measure bread. Elowen watched them from the bakery steps. Something in their manners felt wrong, not openly hostile, simply too practiced, like a mask worn long enough to grow comfortable. That night, as snow began again, Elowen woke to a hush that was not natural. The wind had stopped, and the world felt held in a breath. She rose and looked through a crack in the shutter. In the street below, the men from the south were moving quietly, not toward the inn where they were meant to sleep, but toward the storehouse. They carried crowbars. Their laughter was silent, contained in shoulders that shook. Elowen's skin turned cold. She could wake the town, but by the time neighbors gathered with pitchforks, the storehouse would be empty, and someone would be hurt in the scrambling fear. Larkalo's courage was untrained and sharp-edged. Then she saw something else. At the far end of the street, where the lamplight thinned, a figure stood as still as he had in the trees. The same long coat, the same quiet posture. The men did not notice him at first. He moved without hurry, stepping into the lamplight as if he belonged there. When the thieves turned, their bodies tensed, instincts waking before their minds caught up. Elowen expected drama, a shout, a clash, a scream. Instead, the figure simply spoke. His voice did not carry to her window in words, only in the gentle cadence of something said with certainty. The thieves froze as though listening to a truth that made their plans feel suddenly small. One of them lifted his crowbar, hesitated, then lowered it again. The figure gestured toward the road out of town, the direction they had come. Not forceful, not pleading, just indicating. The men exchanged looks. One muttered something. Another spat into the snow. But then, in a series of unwilling steps, they retreated, backing away as if the air around the figure had become too heavy to move through. They left their tools behind, clattering to the ground like dropped intentions. In minutes, they were gone into the dark. The figure remained a moment longer, looking up, not directly at Elowen's window, but toward the row of houses, as if checking that the town was still asleep and safe. Then he turned and vanished into shadow with the same unhurried grace. Elowen stood at the shutter, trembling, not from fear exactly, but from the feeling of having witnessed something that did not fit any of the stories she had been given. In the morning, the council found the abandoned tools and decided the story for everyone. "The king chased them off," old Bram said, voice thick with vindication. "He protects his food. He doesn't want us stolen from, he wants us kept." Kept, the word landed like a chain. Elowen looked at the crowbars lying in the snow, half buried, and tried to imagine a creature that saved a town simply to preserve it like winter preserves fruit. It felt possible. It also felt incomplete. That evening, Elowen did something she had not planned to ever do. She walked toward the northern gate, beyond the last lantern, to where the road became a narrow ribbon into pine darkness. She wrapped herself in her thickest cloak and carried a small loaf of bread, real bread, made from the grain that had appeared at her well. Her heart argued with her the whole way. This was foolish. This was how stories ended badly. But she could not shake the image of the raised hand, the rope on the mill door, the thieves retreating without a single scream. At the edge of the forest, she stopped. Snow fell lightly, catching in her lashes. She listened. The world did not answer at first. Then, from between two trees, he appeared. Up close, he was not the monster the town imagined. He was pale, yes, with the sort of stillness that came from centuries of not needing to hurry. His hair was dark, his eyes a deep, shadowed gray that reflected lamplight like wet stone. He wore gloves, and his coat looked old in a dignified way, the seams repaired rather than replaced. He did not come closer than a respectful distance. He did not smile, but his face was not cruel. It was restrained, as if he had learned to keep emotion behind a door for other people's comfort. "Elowen of Larkalow," he said, and the fact that he knew her name should have terrified her. Instead, it made her oddly sad, as if she had been watched not by a predator, but by someone who had memorized the town the way a guardian memorizes a map. Her throat tightened. The title felt too large to speak aloud in the forest. "You're him." "I am Valerius," he said softly, "and I am sorry that my presence brings you fear." Elowen's fingers clenched around the loaf. She had rehearsed accusations, questions, a fierce demand to leave them alone. None of it held its shape now. "Why do you leave food?" she asked. "Why do you stand in the road at night? If you wanted harm, you wouldn't do it like this." His gaze lowered to the loaf in her hands. For a moment, something like longing passed over his face, not hunger but memory. He looked away, as though embarrassed by his own expression. "Because I remember," he said, "what winter does to a village, what men do when hunger makes them brave enough to become cruel." "You could take from us," Elowen said, her voice unsteady. "Everyone says you take." "They say many things," Valerius replied. "Fear makes its own meals." She found herself angry at the years of stories, angry at the council for feeding them, angry at herself for believing any of it simply because it was old. Are you kind?" she demanded, the words sounding almost childish in the cold air. "Or is this just another kind of taking?" Valerius was silent long enough, that Elowen heard the soft creak of trees shifting under snow. "I have taken," he said at last, and his honesty landed heavy. "I have lived a long life, and I will not pretend I have done no wrong. But I am tired, Elowen. Not of life, of being the shape people pour their fear into. In old years, I let it be so. It kept them away. It made borders simpler." "Why change now?" she whispered. His eyes returned to her, steady and strangely gentle. "Because I saw your brother on the road with blood on his sleeve and pride in his walk, and I thought of someone I once loved, long ago, who would rather bleed than ask for help." Elowen flinched. "You watched him." "I did," Valeria said, "to ensure he reached home, to make sure the men from the south did not decide a lone boy was an easy target." Her grip on the bread loosened, the anger draining into something softer and more frightening, understanding. She took a step forward, then stopped, as if an invisible line separated them. "I brought you this," she said, holding out the loaf. It felt absurd, offering bread to a being who, by every rumor, drank blood. Yet her hands did not shake as much as she expected. Valerius did not reach for it. His gaze softened, and he shook his head. "Keep it," he said. "Your home needs it more than I do." "You don't eat?" Elowen asked, the question slipping out. "I can," he answered. "But food is a memory. It tastes like time." She swallowed. "Then what do you want?" Valerius looked past her toward the town lights, small and warm against the snow. "I want Larkhello to survive the winter," he said. "And I want no one to come to my gates with torches in spring, because they decided their fear was more valuable than their gratitude." Elowen almost laughed, but it came out as a quiet breath. "So you do want gratitude?" "No," he said, and for the first time something like weariness edged his voice. "I want peace." She did not know what to do with that. Peace sounded like a human wish, not a monster's. "Elowen," he added, "you should not come here again, not because I would harm you, because the world is not gentle with those who speak to me without hatred. If your council sees you, they will turn their fear on you. Fear needs a nearer target." His concern was so practical it struck her like kindness in its truest form, protective without performance. Elowen stood in the falling snow and made herself ask the question that had been growing in her since the first ribbon appeared. "Why be good in secret?" she asked. "Why not show them, prove the stories wrong?" Valerius's eyes lifted to the black branches above, where the snow gathered like pale blossoms. "Because," he said quietly, "if I ask them to see me as good, I make my goodness a bargain. I do not want their obedience. I want their safety. Secret kindness is the only kind I can give without turning it into a throne." Elowen felt something in her chest pull tight, not with romance like the ballads promised, but with recognition. The recognition of someone who had done small kindnesses in her own life without anyone noticing, simply because someone had to. She looked down at the loaf in her hands and realized she had come to offer him food, but he had given her something else, a new shape for the world. "What are you?" she whispered, not as an accusation but as a plea. Valerius's face held a faint sorrow. "A king in a country that does not want me," he said. "A creature made in violence who tries, every day, to live differently." The forest seemed to hold them in a quiet pocket of time. Elowen wanted to step closer, to bridge the space between fear and truth, but she remembered his warning. The world would not be gentle. So she did the only thing she could. She lowered the loaf to the snow between them, a small offering that asked for nothing. Then she stepped back, bowed her head, not in submission but in respect, and turned toward home. Behind her, she heard no movement. Only, when she reached the road and dared to glance back, the loaf was gone, and in its place lay a single black ribbon, folded neatly like a promise. Winter deepened. Larkhello did not starve. Food continued to appear in careful measures, never so much that it looked like abundance, always enough that the weakest could keep breathing. Once, when a fever swept through the town, a bundle of dried willow bark and a vial of clear tincture appeared on the healer's step. When the river ice cracked and threatened to take the bridge, the town woke to find the supports reinforced with fresh timber, the work done overnight with an artisan's precision. The council called it all proof of the king's possession. They spoke of tribute and debt and the danger of being kept. But in the quiet corners of town, where women stirred pots and watched children's cheeks regain color, a different story began to form, not spoken loudly, not declared like a rebellion. It was a story made of glances and softened shoulders, of people who stopped crossing themselves quite so violently when ravens flew low. Elowen said nothing. She did not defend Valerius in public. She did not confess that she had stood in the forest and heard him speak peace like a prayer. She simply watched. And she noticed, over time, that fear changed shape when it was not fed. In early spring, when the snow began to melt in thin streams that sounded like whispered conversations, the council received word that a larger town to the south planned to send hunters to the northern ranges. They framed it as a mission of protection, an opportunity to rid the world of its vampire king once and for all. Larkalo gathered in the square to hear the announcement. Faces that had been softened by survival tightened again. "We cannot be seen as allies," the magistrate warned. "If they believe we've accepted his gifts, they'll punish us for it. We must show we stand with the living." Elowen stood at the back of the crowd, her hands clenched in her cloak. The crowd murmured, nervous and eager. It was terrifying how quickly people could turn gratitude into denial when their own safety was threatened. That night, Elowen walked again to the forest edge. Valerius was already there, as if he had felt the shift in the air. He stood beneath the bare branches, the moonlight turning his pale face almost luminous. "You heard," Elowen said. "I always hear," he replied, and there was no bitterness in it, only a tired acceptance. "They're coming," she whispered, "and the council will let them pass. They'll point to your castle like it's a map to a monster." Valerius's gaze moved to the distant outline of his towers on the ridge, barely visible through mist. "Then they will come," he said. Elowen's throat tightened. "Will you run?" He looked at her, and in his eyes was a quiet truth she had not wanted to consider. "If I leave," he said, "they will follow, and where they go, they bring fire and certainty. Larkalo will be trampled under their righteousness simply because you are near my borders." "You've protected us," Elowen said, the words trembling. "All winter." "I did what I could," Valerius murmured. "And now you'll—" She couldn't say die. It felt too dramatic, too final for someone who had lived longer than her whole family line. But she could picture him alone in his castle, taking the blame for 1,000 stories, and something in her broke open with a fierce tenderness. Valerius watched her struggle with words, and his voice softened. "Elowen," he said, "I do not fear what they can do to me. I fear what they will do to you if they learn you spoke to me. That is why I asked you not to return." "I had to," she said, tears burning in her eyes. "You can't keep saving us in secret and then let them destroy you so we can pretend we were never helped." A silence settled between them, thick with all the things neither of them could safely give. At last, Valerius stepped closer, not crossing the line entirely, but nearing it enough that Elowen could see the fine details of him. The faint scar at his jaw, the way his expression held constant restraint, as if kindness in him had learned to move quietly to survive. "You owe me nothing," he said. Elowen shook her head. "That's what everyone says when they want to be noble," she whispered. "But it's not true. We owe each other everything. That's what it means to live near one another." For a moment, Valerius's eyes closed, as if her words were both a comfort and an ache. When he opened them, there was resolve there, not fierce, not vengeful, simply calm. "I will not fight them," he said. Not with the violence they expect. If they come to end my reign, I will meet them at the pass before they reach your town. I will let them see me. I will give them no reason to take their fear out on your homes." Elowen's breath caught. "You'll surrender." "I will stand," Valerius corrected gently. "There is a difference." When Elowen returned to town, she did not sleep. She sat with her mother, watching the candle burn down, listening to the quiet of a house that had been warmed by anonymous mercy. In the morning, she went to the square and asked to speak. The magistrate frowned at her. "Elowen Harrow," he said, as if her name were a minor inconvenience. "What is it?" Elowen's voice did not shake as much as she expected. "We survived this winter because someone kept leaving food," she said. "We can pretend it was the wind. We can pretend it was luck. But we know." Murmurs rose, uneasy. "If hunters come," Elowen continued, "and they ask whether the king has harmed us, we should not lie. We should not offer our fear as currency to buy safety. He kept thieves from our storehouse. He repaired our bridge. He left medicine for our sick." Old Bram scowled. "So now you speak for the monster." Elowen met his gaze. "I speak for the truth," she said quietly, "and for the part of us that remembers what it is to be helped without being owned." The crowd shifted. Some faces hardened. But others, women who had fed their children from black-ribboned sacks, men whose shoulders had loosened when the bridge held, looked down as if ashamed of their own silence. The magistrate lifted a hand. "Enough," he said sharply. "We will not invite trouble." Elowen nodded. "Trouble comes whether invited or not," she replied. "But we can choose what we become when it arrives." The hunters came 3 days later. They were not a roaring army. They were a small band of determined men with holy symbols and careful eyes, led by a woman in a gray cloak who carried herself like a judge. They rode into Larkalow with the kind of confidence that assumed agreement. The magistrate met them at the gate, smiling too hard. "We welcome you," he said. "We have long lived in fear of the creature in the north." The woman's gaze swept the town. "Has he fed on your people?" "No," the magistrate said quickly. "Not that we can prove, but he has watched, he has threatened." Elowen stepped forward from the crowd that had gathered behind. Her hands were cold, but her spine held. "That isn't true," she said. Heads turned, the magistrate's face tightened. "Elowen." The hunter leader studied her. "And you are?" "Elowen Harrow," she said. "He did not threaten us, he protected us. He left food. He drove off thieves without harming them. He helped our sick." The hunter's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with suspicion that had been trained into habit. "Why would a vampire do that?" Elowen swallowed. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I've seen the results. And I think we have been using fear to avoid gratitude because gratitude would require us to see him as something other than a story." Silence held the gate. Even the horses seemed to breathe more softly. The hunter leader looked from Elowen to the townspeople. "If what you say is true," she said slowly, "then he is either manipulating you with uncommon patience, or he is different." Elowen nodded. "Maybe," she said, "but if he wanted us as livestock, we would not be alive and stubborn enough to argue with you." A few people in the crowd let out startled breaths, almost laughter, quickly swallowed. The hunter leader's gaze sharpened, then softened by a fraction. "We will proceed," she said, "but we will proceed carefully." They did not march through town with torches. They did not shout prayers at the sky. They rode north along the pass road with the town watching like witnesses to something fragile. Elowen did not follow. She stayed in Larkalow, hands clasped together until her knuckles ached, listening for distant sounds that never came. No screams, no clash of steel, no dramatic ending. At dusk, a messenger returned. The hunter leader rode into town alone, her horse lathered and weary. Her face was pale, not from battle, but from the kind of shock that changes a person quietly. The magistrate hurried forward. "Is it done?" he demanded. The woman dismounted and stood for a long moment as if choosing each word. "He met us at the pass," she said. "He did not attack. He did not flee. He stood in the road and asked us not to come nearer because our boots would bring trouble to your homes." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "He offered," she continued, voice roughening, "to leave these lands entirely, to go beyond the northern ice where no villages lie. He asked only that we do not punish the towns that benefited from his charity." The magistrate's mouth opened, closed. "And you let him go?" old Bram demanded, as if outraged by mercy. The hunter leader's eyes flashed, but not with rage, with something like reluctant respect. "He did not beg," she said. "He did not bargain. He simply chose exile so you would not be harmed by our suspicion. I have hunted monsters. This did not feel like one." Elowen's breath left her like a prayer she hadn't known she was holding. Exile, lonely, quiet. The thought hurt more than fear ever had. "What now?" someone asked. The hunter leader looked across the town, at the thin faces that had grown fuller, at the repaired bridge in the distance, at the children who clutched their mothers' skirts. "Now," she said, "you decide what story you will tell. You can say you drove him away with courage and holy resolve. Or you can say the truth, that the being you feared saved you and left so you could keep your pride." The crowd stood in the softening light, and Elowen saw it then. The way fear had been a shield not against the vampire king, but against the discomfort of owing someone they did not want to understand. Spring unfolded slowly. The river ran clear. The last snow retreated to the shadows of pines. The black ribbons stopped appearing. Larkalow returned to its routines, but something had shifted. People spoke more softly when they spoke of the north. The magistrate avoided Elowen's gaze. Old Bram stopped spitting when ravens flew low. One evening, weeks later, Elowen walked alone to the edge of the forest and stood where she had left the loaf. The air smelled of thawing earth and wet bark. She did not expect anyone to appear. She only wanted, for herself, to say goodbye to the idea of him, to honor something quiet and rare. She placed a small bundle on the snowless ground, a loaf of bread, a strip of clean cloth, and because she had no ribbon of black, one of her own hair ties, dark and simple, knotted carefully the way his had been. Then she waited a moment, listening. A raven landed on a nearby branch and looked at her with bright, intelligent eyes. It tilted its head, as if considering whether she was worth remembering, then gave a single low call and flew north. Elowen stood in the hush it left behind and felt tears come, not dramatic, not despairing, just honest. She went home carrying a quieter kind of warmth. Because the world would continue to fear what it did not understand. Stories would keep their sharp edges. But somewhere beyond the northern ice, a king without subjects walked into solitude by choice, not because he was driven, but because he would rather be misunderstood than let others pay for the truth of him. And in a town that once spoke his name like a curse, people began, slowly, to speak it like a complicated blessing, careful, humbled, and softened by the realization that kindness could exist behind fear, and that sometimes the gentlest love is the kind that refuses to demand to be seen.